No, I remember it was 1987, July 7th, and it was our concert in Roma, and I had never been to Roma before. And the audience were sitting on these, there were thousands of people sitting on all these steps. And they were facing this way, and the stage was over there. And we were facing this way. So it was a very memorable concert. Very cool.
Well, David, this is the place of your first concert here in Rome in 1987,
Si.
and the 7th of July. And I was...
You were there.
Yes, I was there. And it was a beautiful concert. You can speak about it, about your feeling, about your first impression here in Rome, about your life. But
Yeah.
from the first.
No, well, the concert in Rome, you know, it's 35 years ago, and also we performed on the Still Life Talking tour. We performed hundreds of concerts, but I remember performing in Rome on that concert because it was it was my first time in Rome ever, and we didn't have very much time here. We had performed somewhere the night before, Carrara, I think. And so we came to Rome, and then we went to the hotel, and then we came to the stage, and we had a sound check, and then we did, I was in Rome, and I wasn't able to see Rome. I'll get to that, but the concert was a beautiful evening, and I remember it was very unusual to be in this setting because it was outside, fuori, right, like this, and instead of there being seats, there was these beautiful steps, and everyone was sitting up here, and we were facing them. And but one thing I remember about that concert, there was a young woman who was working for the promoter, and her name was Gloria. And she said to me after, "Would you like to see Rome?" Yeah, and so the next day we didn't have to depart until I think lunch, noon or mezzogiorno. Yeah? So she came to the hotel and she picked me up in her car, and she drove me down into the center by the Colosseum and the Spanish Steps and the fountain,
Yes.
and we walked and had a coffee, and then she brought me to the hotel, and it was so kind,
Yes.
of her to do this, because that way I saw a bit of the real Rome. The ancient Rome and the Rome that everyone, because if she hadn't have done that, I would have only seen, which it's nice here, but I'm glad that I got a chance.
And yours the first impression.
My first impression, it was beautiful. So I remember that very clearly.
You was born in England.
Yes, I was born in Yorkshire, Bradford in Yorkshire. Well, they talk like this in Bradford in Yorkshire, No, it's not like the rest of England, it's a bit of a different accent up there. And I lived there, here I go back to my American accent, but I lived there in Bradford until I was 11.
Oh.
It's very interesting because my name is David Blamires, or Blamires in English, And most people, when they see it written, they would think Blamires.
Yes,
but
it's
not.
Spanish.
Like Ramirez. But I'm not, I'm English. And the name, my name and my that's my father's name, obviously, but even on my mother's side of the family, my ancestors go back hundreds of years in the same town in Bradford. So I have a very deep sense of who I am ancestrally. Do you understand? It's not like, oh, my father was this and my mother was from here, and we were all, the Blamires and the Kemps were all going back hundreds of years in the same town. And I discovered very, very early in life that I loved music. And I discovered very early in life that I could sing.
How many years you?
Well, I don't remember the first time I was singing, but I just know that I've been singing since I've been alive, you know. I was in, when I was a little boy, I was in the church choir with, you know, the little choir boy, and in the school, and always singing. And I remember my father, he'd get annoyed. He'd say, shut up, stop singing, you know, because I would always be singing. So music and singing, especially singing, came very natural to me. And another beautiful memory I have of my origins, you asked about my origins, is that my mother wasn't a professional singer at all, but she had a beautiful voice, and she used to sing along with the radio, you know, and she'd sing harmonies.
Yes.
Instead of singing the melody, she'd sing a harmony. So my young ears instinctively discovered what harmony was. I grew up in the early 60s in England, and the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
You know?
First love for all of us.
Yeah, no, but before they even were, you know, superstars all over the world, in England in the early 60s, in 62, 63, before they went to America and did Ed Sullivan and all of that, they were on TV all the time, on the variety shows in England. So I've had the Beatles in my life since a very, very early age, you know.
You spoke about melody and
harmonies. Yeah.
Harmonies and melodies. When I hear your work, I feel melodies in everywhere.
Yes.
Your beautiful voice, it's amazing. Yeah. And
melody is very important.
What's important?
It's very important to me, and I create my own music. You know, I've worked with Pat Metheny and some great people for many years, but I create my own music. I compose and produce my own music, and melody, when I'm creating my music, is very, very important. And sometimes, you know, a song will begin with a melody, and I'll go, wow, and I'll make something out of it. And other times, and I've gotten better at it, I'll have some other kind of basis, a foundation for a composition with no melody. And then it's a little more difficult, but I'll create a melody on top of another, you know, something like a foundation of something. And I've gotten to the point where I can come up with something very satisfying, you know, a satisfying melody on top of something that already exists. And I think about some of my favorite composers of music, songs, you know, I mean, music too, even classical music and jazz and stuff, but I think of, like, I could name a few, like, for example, and I know Pat feels this way too, Burt Bacharach.
Oh, yes.
What incredible creator of melodies and songs and the chords and too, but his melodies are just, you know, they give me chills. Paul McCartney is another one. What a melodist he is, you know. Fool on the Hill, I mean, you know, and that's pop music. There are others. Pat and Lyle were both, genius, instinctively amazing composers of melodies and themes. In other kinds of music, I was just thinking about this recently. Tchaikovsky, because I love classical music. Debussy, those two, the melodic lines. Clair de Lune, Tchaikovsky. Everything he wrote was had the most beautiful melodic elements to it. So those are things that really appeal to me.
Chopin with the piano.
Yeah, see, I know less of his music. Tchaikovsky and Debussy I know very much. But
Perhaps your love for Italy as
Puccini. Go on.
Yeah. And
Another one. I'm sorry. Was that him?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a
Spaghetti
Western
Westerns,
film.
which
yeah.
is probably his most, reputable. People probably know about that more than anything else. But it's so distinctive and unusual, and of course he's got all this other beautiful music too, Cinema Paradiso and all
Yes.
that. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Morricone, of course. Yeah. And I read that he lived in Rome, right? And he went to L.A. Never went to Hollywood to do scores. He'd do everything here, and he'd sit and he'd write everything, and maybe he'd create little things, but he'd write everything a lot of the times by ear.
Yes.
Just in his head, he'd write things instead of. So he's a fascinating guy,
Can you speak about your music, your work?
Well, I don't know that I was, it took me a long time in life as a musician to get to a point where I was happy with the music I created myself. And I remember being, maybe I was still a teenager, in my late teens, and I was in bands with friends, and people were writing songs, and I just didn't. I wasn't happy with anything I created. And then one day I just was sitting there, and I think I wrote my first song, and I thought, wow, this is actually okay, And from there, ever since that time, I think it's like anything. The more you do, the better you get at it. And then I created songs, and then in 1990 I released a CD in Canada, CD and cassettes, and it was jazz, fusion and world music, and I composed or co-composed all the music, and a lot of that has been. It's 32 years ago, but people still. The guy outside the concert last night, he had me sign.
Yes.
We live here, but he said, he mentioned Until We Know, which is one of my songs from that album, And this is a young guy. I don't even look like he was even born when that was recorded. And then through the years, I've always been composing songs, and I've been releasing songs with some friends of mine, co-producing on the Empress music label over the past, since COVID, started, because I needed things to do in my home when I wasn't able to leave my home for months. So, but also one of the other things. And I love the new music that I'm doing. I like it a lot, and I've got more coming out soon. One of the things that I've done, though, in my life, and it's important, it's not pop music and it's not contemporary stuff you hear on the radio, but I compose music for commercials, for advertising. And I've been doing it for 25 years in Chicago. And in Toronto, I did a bit of it, too. So as I've been composing music every day, every weekday for 25 years. So I've gotten to a point where, I found a way to trust my instincts, and sometimes I just wait for the creative idea to arrive, and I go, oh, that's it. And then I will sing an idea into my phone, so I don't forget it and stuff like that. So I love to create music. I love to perform, and sing. That's creating and play. But also I love to create compositions too. Where does my inspiration come from? Well, it's hard to know. I mean, it comes from everywhere. I'm a certain age. I've listened to so much music, and when you're listening to music and you're playing music, but especially listening, like the years and decades of listening to music, you don't realize, I think, that it's actually it's penetrating, and then inside you, and then when it comes time to create, who knows where it comes from. I love the creative process because, and I trust myself. I know enough about finding things, music of value, that if I'm in the car, it always happens to be when I'm driving in my car for some reason, but something will come in my head, and I will pull over, and I'll sing a little idea into my phone, and I always save them, and I don't know where that comes from, why it's so random, and sometimes in the shower, until we know that song, the music came to me in the shower in Toronto in 1988. So the creative process. Now, the other answer to your question is that I'm talking about creating, my own songs or pop music or jazz or whatever. But the music that I do for my work, which is music for commercials, that's on demand. I will have an assignment, and my creative director will say, "Well, we need here's the criteria. It needs to be this long. It needs to be happy. It needs to be blah 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 blah. This or that. It needs to be very unique, and we need it in 3 hours, or by tomorrow morning." So that's a whole different thing. I've learned how to work at creating, and I have a process there too, where maybe it'll start with a little beat, or maybe it'll start with a little something on the keyboard, and then I just build, and then I walk away, have a coffee, come back, and I go, oh, and a new idea will come. So
you compose on keyboard or on guitar?
Both. It depends, it really depends. If it's guitar, it's usually an acoustic guitar, some kind of rhythm. I like to do stuff that has rhythm, because you get the energy right away and some chords, and I write very quickly that way. I come up with a couple of little chords and a rhythm, and it feels good right away. And usually I can make those kind of compositions happen very quickly. But then once I start with something, I'll record it, but then building everything else, the other elements, drums and other sounds and little gestures of other instruments. It takes a little while to do that, but it's a really fun process. I love it.
For the Italian people, what you want to say?
What do I want to say to the
Yes.
Italian people? Oh man, I don't even know where to start. There's a reason that this is the 5th time I've been in Italy in the last 15 months. This is my 5th time here. I came to Italy. I played in Italy with Pat, 3 or 4 different times, and 3 or 4 different, tours, 3 tours. And I always enjoyed myself so much here. And I want to say something that when we were touring in the beginning of in June of 1987, our first gig was in Helsinki, and I lived in England, but I had never been to Europe. Our first gig was Helsinki. Then we went to the Soviet Union for 3 weeks. It wasn't even Russia. It was Soviet Union, Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kiev. And then from Kiev, we flew to Milano. My first time in Europe, other than Helsinki, my first time in Italy. Steve Rodby, the bass player,
Yes.
said to me, while we were in Soviet Union, he said, "Oh, David, wait till you go to Italy." He said, "It's the greatest country in the world, man."